Taxes. At least for me, there's no more unwelcome letter in the mailbox than that plain white envelope with the little window bearing the eagle, the scales, and the olive branch of the Internal Revenue Service. I always wondered about the olive branch. I don't know what the olive branch has to do with it. The scales I can see because you feel like you're being weighed. When I get one, I don't know if you ever do this, maybe it's just my personality, I tend to put it on the kitchen counter and let it breathe for a few days because I'm afraid to look at it. Even if I have absolutely no reason to believe that the news is bad, still, because it says Internal Revenue Service on it, I am afraid of that envelope. It's worth talking about in church, even though the idea of talking about taxes in church doesn't seem to make any sense. I mean, what two things could be more different than taxes and church? Nothing to do with each other. But what makes me think about it is that most of us have so few times when we worry about the power of the state over us. We just don't think about it. Yes, there are New Haven parking tickets, but that's a whole other thing. But most of us have little reason to fear the man in uniform knocking at our door. But somehow when that IRS envelope arrives, I can't help but imagine how I might look in an orange jumpsuit. Taxes, the unwelcome intrusion of the state into my business, my money, as the Tea Partiers say. That intrusion with the subtle implied threat of pay up or go to jail. I'm not going to talk about tax policy today. I can see Yang is yawning already. Tax policy, nothing more boring in the world. But what I want to talk about is this sign of power over me. Why do I get afraid? Why do I get afraid about this envelope? It's because I know these people have absolute power over me. And it makes me think about the many parts of my life that are actually governed by other people and by forces that exert tremendous influence on me, but that I do not include in my impression of myself. I do not see myself as a subject of the Internal Revenue Service, but clearly it exerts great influence on me if I'm this afraid of that envelope. So it gets me thinking about what else in my life is exerting influence on me that changes me that I don't even include in my picture of myself. Perhaps my employer, perhaps my professor, perhaps my crazy roommate. What else is it in my life that is changing me without me knowing? Now, imagine yourself a citizen of a defeated country, subject to a ruthless and powerful empire, where some faraway emperor orders yet another tax on your land, on your person, on your income, enforced by soldiers who seem to hate your culture and your religion. The threat of taxes comes not in a clean white envelope in the mail, but comes with a sword held close to your throat. What should a faithful person do? Pay their taxes and support their own oppression, or resist and die? This is the question the Pharisees and the Herodians come to Jesus with. They say in their most flattering tone, "You are an honest man, O Jesus. You tell the truth no matter what people think. So tell us, should we pay taxes to Caesar?" Just like the most inviting host on Fox News or MSNBC. I'm going to put you in a trap with an unanswerable question. If Jesus says yes, he's no Jewish prophet. If he says no, the plot against him gains another weapon, his treason against the empire. So Jesus, doesn't answer. Instead, he asks for the coin used to pay the tax, because it has to be a special Roman coin, and he says, whose picture is on it? Whose image? And his opponents say, Caesar's, the emperor's. And Jesus says, well, then give Caesar what bears his image, but give God what bears God's image. And you can imagine the Pharisees, as the gospel says, wandering away thinking, what a weird and possibly wise answer. Which I think is the way they feel about Jesus most of the time. Weird, but possibly wise. But wait a minute. He never really answered that question. He never said, should we pay taxes or not? Jesus won't be trapped by flattering words. He won't be trapped by the desire to win an argument. He doesn't, I think, even really want to set the Pharisees straight. I think his words are for the poor and the lost, and they are the ones who hear his message. The last 3 weeks of church, we've heard parables about loyalty. The 2 sons, which will serve the father? The wedding guests, will they respond to the invitation? Who is truly loyal to God, and how do we know? And today, following that, we get a practical test. Broad question of loyalty, how does it come down to earth? It's about taxes. But it's really about more than taxes. It's about all the ways that the world pulls us away from God. Taxes themselves aren't evil. They are just one obligation, one more force acting upon us that we don't know what to do with. But taxes can seem so unreligious, so unchurchly, that we forget that those obligations do affect our life of faith. They have power over us. So I want you to imagine yourself as a NASCAR driver, okay? You have a bright jumpsuit, and on it are patches of all your sponsors. Have you ever seen a NASCAR driver? He must have 100 patches on him of all the companies that are paying for him. I wonder if he has them decaled on his teeth and things too. I don't know. But I want you to imagine what patches your jumpsuit would carry. Who demands your loyalty and your time? Who are your sponsors? Who's paying for you? Maybe academics, maybe success or security. Big patches. That takes a lot of our time and loyalty. Certainly our families, activities, arts and clubs and service. And then there are the things that really take our time that we don't even want to think about, like Facebook and video games and clothes and food, that really occupy more time than we like to think. And then the truly hidden ones that really consume our energy: pointless worrying, grudges, self-doubt, self-pity, envy of other people. One of the best sermons I read on this passage is by Judith Johnson Seabolt, and she writes, "We want to do everything. Rather than select some things to devote ourselves to as the top priority and let others go, and what we end up doing is giving God the balance left over when everything else has been accomplished. All the things we're loyal to, all the labels we bear." She quotes Thomas A. Kelly, and one of my favorite books called A Testament of Devotion. He writes, "We are trying to be several people at the same time, without all ourselves being organized by a single mastering life within us. Each of us tends to be not a single self, but a whole committee of selves. And each of ourselves, in turn, is a rank individualist, not cooperating with the other selves, but shouting out their vote loudly for themselves when voting time comes. It is as if we have a chairman of our committee of many selves who does not integrate the many into one, but who merely counts the votes at each decision and leaves disgruntled minorities. We are not integrated. We are distraught. We feel honestly the pull of many obligations, and we try to fulfill them all." But life is meant to be lived from a center, a divine center. But most of us, I fear, have not surrendered the rest in order to discover the holy within. When Jesus asks the Pharisees whose image is on the coin, the word for image is the same word when translated into Greek from Genesis 1:26 to 27. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness." So God created humankind in his image, in the image of God. He created them, male and female, he created them. If we give to our obligations, to Caesar, the coins that bear their image, what's left to give to God? Only everything. Only our whole selves, which bear the image of God. If we give that small image to Caesar, what is it that bears the image of God? Just all of us and all of our lives. Perhaps it's because the divine image we bear seems so distant. So instead, we bear the image of the pressures on us, of the society that made us, of every demanding advertisement we've ever watched, of every obligation we feel we need to bear. Perhaps it would be easier to say no to these limitless demands, to give the fullness of our lives to God, if we realize that who we are is not the things we imagine or fear other people think we are. Who we are is a holy people made in the image of God. My fear often is that I will be a failure, unloved, unrecognized, unrewarded, and that fear is even more powerful than the fear of the state, even more powerful than the fear of the IRS. Jesus would have us reverse our culture's formula that I should live in fear of what I am not, and let that determine my priorities. Jesus says, live into what you are, divinely created, loved since the day of your birth, forgiven even the sins you can't forgive yourself, filled with God's Spirit, destined for God's kingdom. I am not an empty vessel waiting to be filled by life. I am not a nameless cipher waiting for achievement or relationship to save me. I am a child of God. And on that basis, I am empowered to say no to everything else that exerts power over me. I know who I am, and I know whose I am. It's easy to forget in our secular culture that there are fewer reminders of obligation and faith than the young men who gathered here 150 years ago had. They had daily required chapel and twice on Sunday, sometimes up to 6 hours of church. Though many of them resisted, and they did, their world was one where Christian faith was presumed and their world worked on a Christian basis. Some look back on that world with nostalgia, but I prefer the world we have, where my Catholic or Jewish neighbors have the same rights I do. In a secular society, however, we have to work harder at maintaining our priorities. No time will be set aside for us for faith. It will not be required. We will not learn the Bible in school. We live in a world where the easy presumption that Protestant faith is normal is gone. The world we live in is, I think, still a better world, because when Christian becomes normal, it usually ceases to be really Christian. But I think the temptation this world puts us in is to make faith a hobby, an unusual interest that I happen to have, like collecting antiques or following the Chicago Cubs. Something I could change, maybe. Something I do when nothing important is happening. The rest of the world will not give us time for our faith. We have to fight for it. The rest of the world won't tell us what we believe. We have to read the scriptures for ourselves. If we find the time, though, the time to remember in whose image we were made, in whose spirit we live, we can overthrow the tyranny of the Caesars, the many of them, the false gods of obligation and money and elitism and beauty and success and power. But I will not leave you where Jesus left you. Should we pay our taxes? Doesn't Jesus finally care about injustice and oppression? Yes, he does. But he knows we pay much higher taxes to our own fears and those thrust upon us than we do to the empire. And only when we are free from the taxes of desire can we truly challenge Caesar's order. Amen.